John Stuart Mill, J.S. Mill, who was considered as the last of the utilitarians and the foremost of the individualists, was born in 1806. As a child, he spent most of his time with his books. He was greatly influenced by the dialogue and direct methods of Plato. History of Roman government also greatly influenced him. But the maximum influence on him was exercised by the utilitarian philosophy of Bentham. He wrote large number of books and pamphlets. His important works include System of Logic, Principles of Political Economy, Enfranchisement of Women, On Liberty, Dissertations and Discussions, Thoughts on Parliamentary Reforms, Considerations on Representative Government, Utilitarianism, Women Suffrage, Subjection of Women, 3 Essays on Religion etc. Though Mill was greatly influenced by the utilitarian philosophy of Bentham, he made several modifications in his philosophy. Some of the points where Mill differed from Bentham were distinction between higher and lower pleasure. Pleasure was not the only cause and motive for individuals' actions. Mill believed that pleasure comes from outside and not from within. Mill believed in good life rather than life devoted to pleasure. Mill considered liberty as essential for the attainment of the principle of utility. Mill stood for public voting as against secret voting advocated by Bentham. He stood for special treatment of women and was more concerned with the social and economic problems facing the society. Mill was a great champion of individual liberty and stood for least interference by the government in the affairs of the individual. He asserted that so long as the actions of the individual concerned him alone and did not go against the interests of the others, he should be free and there should be no limitation on him. He permitted the state to impose restrictions on the liberty of the individual only if it caused injury to the interests of other members of the community. Mill also made a forceful plea for freedom of thought and asserted that the state had no justification to suppress the independent thinking of an individual. However, Mill's views on liberty have been severely criticized by Barker. He describes Mill as prophet of empty liberty because Mill hedged his doctrine of liberty with so many restrictions. Mill considered the state as the product of the will of the people who compose it. He thus rejected mechanistic theories of state. He did not emphasize the negative character of the state like Bentham and asserted that state interference is indispensable for the development of individuals' personality. Mill considered representative government as the best form of government because it brings out the general standard of intelligence and honesty existing in the community. However, he was quite aware of the shortcomings of the representative government prevailing in England and suggested several reforms to improve its working. Mill advocated restricted adult franchise and weightage in voting for the educated and propertied classes. This has made some critics remark that Mill was not a true Democrat. However, this charge is not fair. In fact, Mill was an ardent follower of democracy and held that democracy alone could give pleasure and happiness to the people. Mill tried to draw a distinction between the true and false democracy and the democracy which gave weightage to all the different elements of the society. Mill made several suggestions to make democracy more effective. Mill is regarded as a great individualist who strongly opposed state interference because it led curtailment of individual liberty. He defended the institution of private property because it contributed to the progress of the mankind. However, Mill permitted the state to deal with the land in the general interest of the community. Mill also fully sympathized with the laboring classes and favored partnership of the laborers either among themselves or with the capitalists. His sympathy with the laboring classes gives the impression of Mill being a socialist. Though Mill saw in the socialist system the best possibility to effect improvement in the existing economic system, he was not willing to sacrifice the individual for the sake of social good. Though the political thought of Mill suffers from several inconsistencies and logical contradictions, has been assigned an important position among political philosophers by scholars like Maxey, Bowell, Wiper etc. The main contributions of Mill as highlighted by these scholars include his analytical rather than synthetical approach, emphasis on the principle of human progress as goal of civilization, remedial measures to check the tyranny of the majority over minority, opposition to the government interference in the economic sphere beyond a particular limit, advocacy of women rights etc. Mill exercised profound influence on the contemporary intellectuals as well as those who followed him.